I knew something was wrong before I even shut off the engine. That sounds dramatic, I know, but sometimes you pull into your driveway, and the whole place feels just a little off, like somebody moved one picture frame in your house, and your brain catches it before your eyes do. That was me pulling back into my place in Maple Ridge after 4 days out of town. Same quiet cul-de-sac, same trimmed lawns, same mailboxes lined up like they'd been frozen there for 20 years, but something in my backyard felt wrong. I grabbed my overnight bag, walked through the kitchen, looked out the back window, and stopped cold. My fence looked closer. Not broken. Not leaning. Closer. Like the whole thing had somehow shifted while I was gone. I actually laughed to myself at first because it sounded ridiculous. Fences don't just move. But then I walked outside toward the shed near the side yard, and that laugh disappeared real quick. The space between the shed and the fence had always been wide enough for my riding mower. Easy fit. I'd driven through there 100 times. Now it barely squeezed through, and the wheel clipped the corner. I stood there staring at it for a second, then went inside, grabbed a tape measure, and came back out. 3 feet. Just about 3 full feet gone. My stomach dropped. I walked the entire fence line, and everything clicked into place at once. Fresh cedar boards. New concrete around the posts. Hardware that still looked bright. They hadn't repaired the old fence. They had replaced it, and whoever did it had rebuilt the whole thing 3 feet into my property. The people next door were a couple named Grant and Melissa Whitaker. They'd moved in about 2 years after I bought the house. At first they were fine. Friendly enough. Grant always wore those expensive golf polos, and Melissa had this polished smile that somehow never reached her eyes, but we got along. Way from the driveway, small talk while dragging out trash bins, the normal suburban neighbor thing. Nothing special. No drama. My place sat at the end of the cul-de-sac on just under an acre. Big flat backyard, mature trees, enough room that you felt like you had breathing room even in a neighborhood. One of the reasons I bought it back in 2018 was that side yard. The fence line was straight and established and old. The original neighborhood builder had put it there back in the 90s, and every survey tied to my closing documents showed the same exact boundary. No mystery. No dispute. Clean and simple. Then about 6 months earlier, Grant had started mentioning renovation plans. Bigger kitchen. Sunroom. Extended patio. Maybe a pool if permits worked out. At first I didn't think much about it. Everybody upgrades eventually. Then one evening he came over holding a beer and leaning against my porch railing like we were old friends. He said, "Hey man, random question. You know exactly where the property line runs over here?" I pointed toward the fence and said, "Pretty much where it's always been." He smiled and nodded and said they were just double-checking paperwork because contractors were coming by. Totally casual. Totally forgettable. Until now. I marched next door and knocked harder than I meant to. Melissa opened the door. She gave me that smile. "Hey Nathan." I didn't smile back. "Did you guys replace the fence?" Her expression barely changed. "Yeah." The old one was leaning. "Why is it sitting 3 feet inside my yard?" She crossed her arms and glanced over her shoulder. Grant walked up carrying folded papers like he'd been expecting me. That alone made my blood pressure spike. He opened the papers against the wall and pointed. Actually, according to our property sketch, the old fence was off. I looked down. It wasn't a certified survey. It looked like an old planning sketch with a highlighted line running into my lawn. I said, "I have a certified survey from when I bought this house." He shrugged and gave me the kind of smile that instantly makes you want to punch drywall. "Maybe yours is outdated." Outdated. That word sat in my chest the whole walk back to my house. I dumped my suitcase by the stairs, pulled my closing folder from the office cabinet, and spread everything across the dining room table. Survey. County stamp. Legal description. Signature. Every line exactly where I remembered it. I called the survey company first thing the next morning. A woman answered, pulled up my address, and said, "Yep, we still have your file." 2 days later, a surveyor named Colin came out with his tripod and gear. Quiet guy, probably late 50s, looked like he'd spent decades settling arguments people should have solved without him. He checked the records, calibrated his equipment, then started marking points. I stood there in the grass while he measured and remeasured. Grant watched from his patio, pretending not to watch. Melissa stepped out with coffee and whispered something to him. Then Colin drove one final marker into the ground. It landed 3 feet past the Whitaker's brand new fence, squarely on my side. He looked at me and said, "Your fence line was correct." I looked over at Grant. He stared back for maybe half a second, then turned and went inside. That's when the irritation changed into something heavier. Because a mistake feels one way. This didn't feel like a mistake anymore. This felt planned, and I had a feeling they weren't done yet. I barely slept that night. Not because I was angry anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. This felt different. Heavier. Like somebody had walked into my house while I was gone, rearranged the furniture, then stood there calmly insisting it had always looked that way. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing Grant unfolding that paper with that little shrug on his face like he was doing me a favor. By morning, I already knew I wasn't handling this with another conversation over a fence post. I called an attorney a coworker had recommended. A property lawyer in downtown Franklin named Rebecca Monroe. She had this calm voice that somehow made you feel like she'd already seen every dumb thing human beings could possibly do to each other over land. I dropped the survey on her desk, explained what happened, showed her photos from before and after, and before I even finished she leaned back and said, "Okay, so this isn't complicated." That caught me off guard. She tapped Grant's sketch with a pen. "This is not a certified boundary survey. This is basically a planning document. Useful for contractors, maybe, but legally? No." Then she tapped mine. "This one matters." I asked what happens next. She said, "We give them a chance to fix it. Then we stop being polite." I liked Rebecca immediately. That afternoon, she sent formal notice by certified mail demanding the fence be removed and rebuilt on the proper boundary within 10 business days. She included the new survey findings, legal citations, everything. Clean, direct, professional. The Whitakers got the letter the next morning. I know because Melissa stood in her driveway reading it with both hands while Grant paced in circles beside her. He glanced over at my yard twice. Didn't wave. Didn't come talk. That evening I grilled burgers on my patio and watched him measure near the side yard with one of those contractor laser tools. He kept checking his patio slab and scribbling notes. That's when something clicked. Their planned addition, it depended on those extra 3 feet. The patio extension, maybe the sunroom too, all of it had been designed around stealing that strip from me. They didn't accidentally build wrong. They built first and planned to argue later. On day 9, Grant finally came over. I was trimming hedges. He stood by the driveway with his hands on his hips and said, "Nathan, we really don't need lawyers over this." I kept trimming, then moved the fence. "It's not that simple." "Actually, it is." He laughed, but it sounded tight. "Look, our architect based everything off that property sketch. Permits are moving through. Contractors are booked." I lowered the trimmer and looked at him. "That sounds expensive." He stared at me, and for the first time the friendly neighbor mask disappeared. "You know, we can both make this harder than it needs to be." I said. Funny thing is I wasn't the one who moved a fence while my neighbor was out of town. He left without another word. Day 10 passed. Fence stayed exactly where it was. Rebecca filed the encroachment and trespass claim the next morning. Once that happened, things escalated fast. County records got pulled. Permit applications got reviewed. The court scheduled a hearing. And suddenly our quiet little cul-de-sac turned into front row entertainment. My neighbor across the street, retired Navy guy named Carl, brought me coffee one morning and said, "I've lived here 15 years, and this is better than cable." I laughed harder than I expected. Needed that. But underneath it all, I was exhausted. It's amazing how much energy conflict eats, even when you know you're right. Every time I looked outside, I saw that fence sitting where it didn't belong, and it felt like a splinter under skin. Then came discovery. Rebecca found copies of their permit drawings. That's where everything got interesting. Their architect had originally drawn the expansion ending exactly at the real property line. Then there was a revised version submitted after I left town, showing the structure extended farther into what they labeled as usable side setback. 3 feet farther. Rebecca slid both versions across the table to me and just raised an eyebrow. I actually laughed because what else do you do at that point? They really thought this was going to work. A week before court, Grant tried one last time. I was getting mail when he walked up slow and said, "Can we talk like adults?" I said, "We've been doing that." He exhaled. "Look, maybe we split the difference." "Split what difference?" "You keep part, we keep part." "My property line isn't pizza, Grant." His jaw tightened. "You're blowing this up over 3 feet." I looked at him and said, "Then give it back." He didn't answer, just stared for a second, then muttered something under his breath and walked off. Court day felt surreal. Small county courtroom. Wood benches. Fluorescent lights. Rebecca looked completely relaxed. Grant looked tired. Melissa looked furious. Their attorney tried leading with misunderstanding. Honest confusion. Conflicting documents. Rebecca calmly introduced my closing survey, county filings, the updated measurements, then brought Colin in to testify. Colin explained the difference between a planning sketch and a certified boundary survey like he'd explained it 1,000 times before. Precise. Boring. Devastating. Then Rebecca introduced the revised permit drawings. The judge studied both copies longer than anything else. These were submitted after the fence was moved? Grant's attorney hesitated. Yes, Your Honor. The judge looked over his glasses at Grant. Did you notify your neighbor before relocating the fence? Grant shifted in his seat. No. Did you obtain written consent? No. Did you verify with a certified survey before construction? Silence. Then, no. The whole room got very still. The judge wrote notes. Melissa whispered sharply at Grant. He stared straight ahead. Hearing ended faster than I expected. Judge said ruling would be issued within the week. Walking out, Rebecca adjusted her bag and said, You're in very good shape. I asked, Very good shape lawyer talk for definitely? She smiled. It means don't celebrate yet, but maybe buy decent champagne. For 6 days I waited. Every truck outside made me look out the window. Every email notification made my pulse jump. The Whitakers stayed quiet. No contractors. No measuring. Just tension hanging over the whole street like humidity before a storm. Then Friday afternoon Rebecca called. I answered before the second ring. She said, Nathan, we won. My knees literally went weak and I sat down on the kitchen chair. Then she kept going. Fence had to be removed and rebuilt on the legal boundary within 30 days. They were responsible for all survey costs, my legal fees, court costs, and because the encroachment affected submitted building plans, county permits tied to the extension were suspended until corrected. I actually said, Wait, suspended? Rebecca laughed. Yep. That meant no addition, no patio expansion, no moving forward until everything matched reality. I hung up, walked out to the backyard, and stood there in the grass looking at that fence. Grant stepped onto his patio about 10 seconds later. We made eye contact. Neither of us said anything. But for the first time since this started, he looked unsure. Really unsure. And 3 days later the demolition crew showed up. The crew showed up at 8 on Monday morning with a flatbed truck, a trailer full of tools, and the kind of energy contractors bring when they already know somebody else is paying and they'd rather not be involved in the backstory. I had coffee in hand standing near the back patio when the first worker stepped over to the fence and started removing panels one by one. It's funny. I thought I'd feel triumphant in some big dramatic way, like some movie moment where justice lands and everybody claps. But honestly what I felt first was quiet. Just quiet. The kind that settles in your chest after weeks of carrying tension you got used to without realizing it. Each panel came down with that hollow crack of wood separating from screws. Then another. Then another. Grant was outside too. Hands in his pockets. Sunglasses on even though it was cloudy. Melissa came out once, said something sharp to one of the contractors, then stormed back inside and slammed the sliding door hard enough that Carl across the street texted me one word. Yikes. I laughed into my coffee. The workers pulled out every fresh post they'd poured the month before. Concrete chunks stacked in a pile. Dirt leveled back out. Then Colin the surveyor came back to place final markers. Same quiet guy, same measured pace. He tapped the stake into the ground exactly where the original fence line had always been and looked over at me. Back where it belongs. That might have been the most satisfying sentence I heard all month. By midday the new posts were set. Straight line. Perfect spacing. Exactly where they had stood for decades before anyone got creative. But the real part, the part Grant had been trying so hard to avoid, didn't fully hit until the framing contractor came out with their architect the next afternoon. I was trimming the hedge when I saw them in the Whitaker's backyard. Blueprints spread over the patio table. Measuring tape pulled tight. Lots of finger pointing. Then raised voices. Their planned addition no longer fit. Not even close. Without those 3 stolen feet, the side setback rules kicked in. The expanded sunroom had to shrink. The patio edge had to be redesigned. Their proposed pool equipment line suddenly violated clearance requirements. It wasn't just inconvenient. The whole layout unraveled. I heard Melissa snap. You told us this would work. The architect answered. It would have. If the property line had been where you said. Even from my yard that landed hard. Grant looked like he wanted to disappear into the grass. For the next 2 weeks crews came and went. Revised drawings. County inspections. More paperwork. Deliveries canceled. Materials reordered. Their backyard turned into organized chaos. Meanwhile, mine looked exactly the way it always had. The mower fit by the shed again. The fence line felt normal. The simple, everyday kind of normal you don't appreciate until somebody messes with it. One evening, Carl wandered over carrying 2 beers. We leaned against my patio rail watching another contractor load up supplies next door. Carl handed me a bottle and said, "You know, I'm trying real hard not to enjoy this as much as I do." I laughed and clinked bottles with him. Honestly, same. Then he got quiet and said, "People get weird about land." He wasn't wrong. It starts with inches, then pride takes over, and suddenly nobody's talking about dirt anymore. They're talking about winning. About ego. About proving they can take something because they decided they deserve it more. A few days later, Grant actually came over. First time since court. No smile. No golf polo. Just tired. He stood near the fence and rubbed the back of his neck before saying, "I handled this badly." I didn't say anything. He looked at the boards, then at me. The architect told us the expansion was tight. We thought. If the old line had ever been off. He stopped halfway through because I think even he heard how ridiculous it sounded out loud. Then he tried again. "I shouldn't have moved it while you were gone." That part at least sounded honest. I nodded. "No, you shouldn't have." He gave one short laugh, without humor. "Melissa still thinks we could have fought harder." I looked at him and said, "Maybe, but you weren't fighting over your land." That sat there between us for a second. Then he nodded once and walked back home. And weirdly, that was enough for me. I didn't need revenge beyond what already happened. I didn't need some huge dramatic ending. Reality had done more than enough. Their project got cut back. Their costs ballooned. Their permits got delayed for months. And every single inch they tried to take ended up right back where it started. Summer rolled around and things settled down. Their revised edition eventually got built smaller than planned. No oversized patio. No extra encroachment. Just a scaled-back version squeezed exactly inside the real property line. The new fence weathered a little and started blending in. Grass filled the disturbed dirt. The whole neighborhood looked calm again. If you drove down the cul-de-sac, now you'd never know there'd been a legal war over 3 feet of land. But every time I mow past that side yard, I still think about how fast normal can shift when someone decides boundaries are optional. And I think about how dangerous that quiet kind of entitlement can be, the kind that smiles, waves hello, then moves a fence while you're out of town and hopes momentum will do the rest. The truth is, they probably would have gotten away with it if I hadn't checked. If I'd trusted my memory less. If I'd ignored that weird feeling when I pulled into the driveway. 3 feet doesn't sound like much until it's yours. Then suddenly it's principle. Then it's respect. Then it becomes one of those moments that changes how you see people. Because fences are wood, property lines are ink. But trust the thing that really got broken here. And once that goes, rebuilding takes a lot longer than concrete and cedar. So I'm curious, if you were in my position, would you have taken it to court? Or would you have let it go and try to keep the peace? And if you were the judge, after hearing everything, would you have ruled the same way? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I really want to know where you land on this one. And if you enjoy real neighborhood conflict stories like this where the ending feels a little too satisfying to make up, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because trust me, around quiet cul-de-sacs like ours, there's always another story.